said that reading is a way to escape your own life. It can take you to faraway lands. It can put you into other people's shoes and make you more empathetic. It's also a great way to reduce stress and sleep better. But great stories can also inspire you. And this real life story by our special guest today, Carmela Cattuti, will definitely inspire you. So don't go away. We will be right back. If you're joining us, you're watching Books with Brigetti. I'm your host, Brigetti Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa, and our live stream is made possible by StreamYard and BeLive Media. However, this is an audience-centric show, so whether you are joining us over on Facebook, on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and all over on Amazon Live, do know that we are monitoring the comments in real time. So if you would like to say hello, and if you'd like us to give you a shout out, we'd be happy to do that to welcome you to the broadcast. Our amazing guest today is Carmela Cattuti. She has got a wonderfully inspiring story that we'd love to share with you today. But before we bring on my amazing guest, one of the things that I am passionate about is helping you level up. And a lot of authors these days, due to the pandemic, have had to pivot and use online media a lot more to talk about their books and do book releases. Some places are opening up, and some of the authors are starting to do in-person events. But for the foreseeable future, I think we are looking at hybrid. And so you do want to improve your online appearance just a little bit. And one of the things that I personally recommend is the Logitech Brio camera, which is what I use. It's got a trademarked bright light HDR technology, which means it will automatically adjust to your lighting conditions. So it's fantastic for people who don't want to bother too much with lighting and stuff like that to look good on camera. But the one thing that you do want to do is to make sure that people can hear you well. I personally use the Samsung condenser microphone. This has got a solid die cast construction, which helps to reduce noise, because it's very important that people hear you clearly. But if you don't want to have a huge microphone, then do invest in something like the Rode lavalier microphone, which will give you a better sound quality than the built-in microphone in your laptop or even your cell phone. The other thing I recommend, since most people will use their phones, and nothing wrong with that, especially if you're an author on the go, but do use something like a tripod, and along with your tripod, you could use a stabilizer such as the DJI Osmo, which I personally use, or you could use something like the iographer just to stabilize your phone. So I recommend that you look at those little items to improve the quality of your live streams when you are promoting your books. So a little bit about my guest today, and a big shout out to Corinda, who's watching us over on Amazon Live. Carmela Cattuti started her writing career as a writer for the Somerville News in Boston. That's in the USA. Carmela is a writer, a painter, and a yoga instructor. And she said after she finished her graduate work in English literature at the Boston College, she began to write creatively and taught a journal writing class at the Cambridge Centre for Adult Education. But what we're going to talk to her about today is the story that she's penned down about her great aunt. So, who better to tell us about her books and the journey of her great aunt than Camilla herself? Let's welcome her to the show. Camilla, welcome to the show. So glad that I could have you as a guest today.
Yeah, it's so great to be here, Brigitte.
Thank you for stopping by. Now, what is it about your great aunt that impressed you so much that you wanted to share her life and her story? Not just one book, but you've actually done three.
hmm Well, she was such a huge character, and her background was very dramatic, and we lived with her in this huge Victorian home, and she was my nanny. So I knew everything about her. I knew her story because she would tell me her story. I was one of the people who would listen. When you have this kind of unusual experience, and I'll tell you about that, there's not a lot of people you can talk to about it who have experienced the same thing. So for some reason, she kind of targeted me because I was receptive. And she was my nanny because my father had passed away when I was 7, and we lived, in this huge home. And my mother rekindled her career, so she was there. And her story, she was Sicilian and she lived in Messina. And in 1908, in December, there was an earthquake and a tsunami. Most of her family was wiped out, and this is early morning. So people were like jumping out of windows and trying to flee the city, which didn't really work. Most of the population perished. I think maybe 50,000 people were left, and she was one of them, and her brother was one of them. So they roamed the streets until help came, which in 1908 was very slow. And there was a lot of political stuff going on. The North really didn't like the South, so help was slow to come. The Americans came first, so they had all of their boats, and she was rescued by them. But that was after maybe a week. So she survived on the streets with her brother, and packs of children roamed around. The elderly perished. The children, a lot of the kids survived. So she ended up in a convent in Palermo. I mean, she was an orphan, really. There's backstory in the book, and I'll read some passages. So she was sent to Palermo in an orphanage there, and her brother was sent to a similar place with priests. So they weren't together, and she was 10. So at this time, she was 10 years old. And she was raised by the Sisters of Charity at the Butera Palace. The Butera Palace was a huge structure in Palermo, and the prince and princess of Palermo resided there. And they gave the nuns a building for a convent for the orphans, and they also, sort of well-to-do people in the area sent their girls there to be educated. So her experience was she got an education. I mean, otherwise she might not have, had Messina been fine and there was no earthquake. So that earthquake just changed her life. I mean, her life was no more. So it was building from scratch. And she resided there. They educated her. They taught her how to sew, although I think she knew prior to that. Her grandmother taught her, but she really developed her sewing skills. So, the years went on and she just loved being there. The princess paid special attention to her for some reason, and I've researched that, and it's in the second book. She had her wedding reception at the palace, and just odd things happened. The princess loved her because of her sewing skills and creating linens and vestments for the priests and that sort of thing. So, and when she was 18, my guess is, and there's nothing in paper about this, and I've tried to, connect with the Butera Palace, which is now just for visitors, I didn't get feedback, but she, 18, they really wanted her to leave. There was really either you become a nun or you get married. And, she was going to become a nun. But then my great uncle, who was living in the US, and he was from Palermo, he immigrated when he was 12. He couldn't find a wife, and this is in New York. He's in New York. So his cousin, who lived in Palermo, wrote to him and said, well, come on over here and pick one. You can go to the convent and you pick one. A lot of good, beautiful women, and my aunt was quite beautiful. So what the Mother Superior did, and she was very sly. I mean, she was a businesswoman. She had survived the war, World War One. Well, actually, it hadn't happened yet, but she had survived a lot. And so she took my great aunt along with another girl into Palermo to shop. And my uncle just stayed on the side at a cafe and just looked at them, because he had contacted the Mother Superior and asked for a woman. So, he chose my aunt. And then the Mother Superior said to her, look, I don't know if you want to become a nun, but there's this guy who's interested in you. Of course, different language, And she said, we'd like you to meet him. So my great aunt said, well, okay, And, that right then and there, she was different. She could have just become a nun, but it wasn't her style. She really had been inspired to take chances because she had survived this huge earthquake. She had survived earth change.
I mean, she'd gone through so much stuff.
Yeah. And what is she going to do? Just become a nun? And that's it? She couldn't go out on her own. Women didn't do that. There was just, but I want to back up a bit. Her brother had died. He got pneumonia and he had passed away. But I think had he lived, and they were both, older, she probably would have gone with him. But that didn't happen. So she was totally alone. So she had to make these choices. And they met, and there was chemistry. My uncle was good looking, and he dressed very well. Back then, 1912, men did, they wore hats and fedoras and suits. And so she was very impressed. And she would get to go to America. So I think her curiosity.
Big bonus.
Well, I just think she was that way. And this set her apart from a lot of the girls there at the convent. So, the Mother Superior said, and my aunt agreed. She said, okay, I'm going to take a chance. That's what she said. She said, I thought, I'm going to take a chance. I'm not going to become a nun and stay here. So my uncle went to the Mother Superior, and Mother Superior said, you have to come back in a year with a certain amount of money, and then we'll let her go. So she was bought. I mean, that's what I'm figuring. And she said, you're to send cases with clothes, and you should dress her properly, and we'll see. So now my aunt said to me, well, she just wanted to make sure my uncle had enough money for me. But I'm thinking, no, the nun pocketed that. I mean, she wasn't going to just let her go without some kind of compensation. That's what I think happened, actually. But anyway.
That sounds unbelievable. I mean, it's like you can't even imagine someone doing something like that.
Yeah, I know. But back then, people didn't have much. And the Mother Superior was a very good businesswoman. She sold the linens the girls made. She didn't pay them. They were getting room and board. So that's how she would make a lot of her money, selling to upscale people. So, you know, that happened. He did come back. Mont said, well, if he comes back, he comes back. Okay. And he did. So they went.
She must have made quite an impression on him. Because a year is a long time.
Mm-hmm. But
But
I
the
think
fact
she
that he
did.
came back,
I think she appealed to him because she was a hard worker and she was a survivor. And I don't think he saw that in American women. He was an old traditional Sicilian, you know. But yes, I'm sure he was very impressed with her. But I mean, he knew about her connection to the princess of Palermo. So maybe he thought he would benefit from that too. This is all about benefiting, you know.
yeah, yeah.
That's what it was. I mean, my aunt told me a different story, but that's what it was. That's the energy of it. So she came to America, and her life was not easy. I think overall she was disappointed. They landed in Manhattan, and his mother was living in a tenement with the whole family. You know, and my uncle, whose name was Franco. Well, Franco in the book had a 10-year-old sister. So my aunt took her under her wing because she felt like she wasn't getting an education in terms of fashion and clothing. So my aunt had that knack. And she took her under her wing because my aunt's mother-in-law, Franco's mother, was ill most of the time, had a lot of chronic diseases. So my aunt really loved her sister-in-law, and she took her under her wing. So my uncle, they moved out of Manhattan, and they bought this house. Well, they bought several. My uncle actually had several houses before he brought my aunt there, where he would house Italian immigrants, and they would pay him rent, and he would give them reasonable rent. And my uncle was a plumber, electrician, architect. He could do everything. So he maintained those properties. But the home he bought for himself and Angela was this big Queen Anne Victorian in a town called Peekskill. It was 45 minutes from Manhattan, so they were close. And they moved in there. It was a big house, 20 rooms. So my aunt loved it. I mean, it was just an amazing place. But, she ended up taking care of her mother-in-law when she was ill. She took care of the whole family, her brother-in-law. So I think my uncle saw that in her, that she would do that. And she went to work
You're
for
a
the
hard
nuns
worker.
at St. Hard worker, but they took advantage. That's really the bottom line of someone who was so capable and also had a whole different spirituality than the Catholic Church. So that's what I explore in these novels too. Her development of the connection with the unseen world, which was not Roman Catholic. And a lot of them she didn't like, but she became part of the Italian American community. And all of the women and the people really respected her because she was considered educated. She spoke both Italian and Sicilian and some French because the
Wow.
nuns were a French order, and she had to learn Italian because the nuns didn't want them to speak Sicilian. It was a no-no. It wasn't considered educated, but it was considered educated here in the US if you spoke both Sicilian, you spoke Italian, you spoke some French. So she had a culture about her. She was cultured, and she didn't have.
Carmela, I'm listening to you and I'm listening to the story of your great aunt, and I'm thinking, this should be a movie.
Yeah,
this,
well, that's what
this would
everybody
make an
says.
amazing movie.
It would. It really would. because she was an anomaly for her time in terms of entering the Italian American community. Most of that community remained insular in the early 20th century, but not her, because she developed her own dressmaking business. She worked at St. Mary's, which was an Episcopal convent in Peekskill. And my uncle also worked there, did handiwork and gardened and did everything. So she got a job right away, and she didn't speak English. But her work was so far superior to the other women there that they were kind of jealous and didn't treat her very well. So it was tough. And she said it took her about a year to learn English. About a year.
That's not bad.
Not bad. Not bad at all. Well, she was just very smart. Very smart,
I mean, you consider the life that she had and the way she grew up, she had to. It was not by choice. It was just, so one can imagine that she was incredibly street smart and incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
And it sounds like she was quite a refined woman. For someone who was street smart, she was refined. She had taste.
She did.
She did. Wow.
So she'd made most of my clothes when I was a kid. I mean, I didn't buy completely off. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I stood in front of that mirror so many hours in her little studio area. I mean, Well, she kind of equated me with her sister-in-law who had died at 28, heart issues. And so she was looking for someone. She didn't have children herself. She couldn't have children. So, I was kind of it. So
she was doting on you. I mean, when she saw that, interest that you were showing in her story, that must have kind of warmed her heart a little bit, and and just made that connection with you that here's someone who's interested in my life and my story.
That's right. And so after a while, she developed her own dressmaking business, sewing for the Italian American community. I think she kind of started there. She would do alterations for a dress shop in town, but she extended out of that. And that was her uniqueness. Wasn't just making clothes for, the local Italian American community. She started to sew for well-to-do women in the town. So
very smart. That was a smart move.
Smart. I mean, she connected to this nice dress shop with other people, but she was very social. So she would connect where other immigrants wouldn't, because she was elegant and she knew what worked and she knew what material to use. She made wedding dresses. She made that for her sister-in-law. She made her wedding dress.
She had a real sort of natural skill to do that sort of thing, because that's not something anyone can do.
No.
Considering she didn't really have someone who physically taught her to do these things, that she was self-taught. But that's amazing.
Yeah.
This really needs to be a movie.
It would be well, it's a different immigration story. I mean, what do we get? The Godfather and I don't know, The Sopranos and just stuff that's, mundane, really. Now, this is someone who came out and integrated as far as she could while keeping her culture. And she had fabulous, interesting friends too within the community. And, one friend was kind of not a drunk, but she drank all the time, her wine, and she loved my aunt, and my aunt really loved her because she was so funny. And her character's in the book. So I left a lot of her friends in here too,
That is just amazing. Can you read a little bit from the books for us, just to give us an idea?
Yeah. Now I'm going to read from the first book, which is Between the Cracks. And by the way, this is the old cover. All the new covers are on the image that you had put up. I had them redesigned because I wanted them to be connected, Okay, so let's see, I'll do the preface here. And this is from Between the Cracks, One Woman's Journey from Sicily to America. So this is how it all started. And let me just put my glasses on here. Better. Across from Italy's mainland sat the city of Messina like an indomitable fortress. Proud of its solid presence, Messina was the traveler's first encounter with the island of Sicily. The earthy colors of the buildings and landscapes signaled to the visitor or returning Sicilian that Messina and its people belonged to the island, not to any outside political force or cultural tradition. The clang of the donkey carts and the voices calling out to customers to buy wares in the market added to the music of the city's sounds. Visitors marveled out loud at the cathedrals and ancient artwork throughout the city, but the locals walked and spoke softly, especially near the narrow slits between the buildings. Visitors delighted in the snake-like movement of the streets. The streets seemed to lead directly to a famous church or street market, but then would slowly veer off in a different direction. They seemed to be designed to intentionally confuse. The city offered no help in arriving at a specific destination. Ancient buildings were so close together that air barely squeezed through. Residents believed that between the buildings, old mysteries sat, holding the true essence of Messina. So the people were kind of stuck in that mode, in Messina, very old world. And this is where she came from. Whenever one of the townspeople walked close to the openings, there seemed to be a whisper, not a sound you could hear with your physical ears, but heard in your mind. The whisper seemed to convey a yearning that had been imprisoned for hundreds of years. The Sicilians were really downtrodden. People invaded Sicily from everywhere, everywhere across Europe and the Middle East. So they were always invaded. When this happened, people scurried past, heads down, attempting to get away from the whispers in their heads. Messina was so congested with ancient energy, it felt like the city would explode. Hopelessness was a disease that plagued the citizens of Messina during the early 20th century. And, this was when there was a huge immigration because people were really extremely poor and were looking for work. Small eruptions did occur. Whenever some of the dark energy needed release, outbursts took place between the locals who were often surly with one another. Their interactions were always based on scarcity and not just in terms of money. If a resident didn't show enough respect to a compatriot, there would be a confrontation. If someone had more stylish clothes than another, there would be jealousy for the lack of good quality clothes. If a citizen had more leisure time than the next person, there would be gossip about how the person with more time for pleasure was lazy and didn't deserve the extra time. Daydreaming was frowned upon. What was the point of daydreaming when it was just fantasy and would never come true? The city's poor were especially vulnerable to the local mafia and thieves, and this was very true. And I think my aunt was quite aware of that. Many of the men met an early death at the hands of murderers, accidents from factory jobs, or shoveling coal and disease.
Sounds
Women
like
were,
a movie, eh? I mean, it doesn't sound like it's like this could possibly be real, and yet it was.
it was. I mean, they were bombed by the North, during uh, struggle for freedom. They were dominated by the priests and by the upper aristocrats. And there were a lot of aristocrats in Italy at that time in the North, and they didn't want anything to do with the South. Okay. Feeding off people's dreams, it left them with doubt, fear, and misery. This shadowy energy prided itself on soul theft. So you see what kind of world she was raised in. And I'll just read toward the end. I don't want to be long-winded here. Angela returned home one day and learned that her father had left and would not return soon. Her mother explained that he would help. Wait a minute, sorry. A few weeks later, a man moved into their house. Her mother explained that he would help with the rent. After a few months, Angela noticed her mother's belly protruding beneath her homemade faded smock. Angela pretended she didn't notice. She thought of her dream friends and felt less alone. When the earth exploded, Angela was walking on the edge of the city. She blacked out and started to drift. She floated above the earth, peering down into the city. She saw people running, buildings collapsing, and gaping holes in the earth. From that moment on, her experience of the earthquake always felt like a dream. So yeah, that was
Wow.
the society back then, you know. Even when I was there in the early 1970s, you had to be careful walking in Palermo, you know, because there were a lot of thieves around. I mean, it's a very different place now. But
Yeah,
yeah, so you could see why she would choose to leave and just explore other possibilities, you know.
absolutely. Wow. I mean, no lack of excitement there, you know.
No, no.
Definitely
I mean,
not a boring upbringing for sure.
yeah, absolutely.
Oh my
So
goodness. So, how did you decide on making? I mean, did you set out to write three books in
no,
the beginning?
no, not at all. No, I thought, well, I'll write the first one. And I was graduating from Boston College, and I just thought I would be an academic. And I started to write this story because my great aunt used to say, well, somebody has to write my story. In fact, one of her customers was a playwright, and she said, I might write your story, Angelina. But that never happened. And that's in the book too, or the second book, I think. So I thought, well, I'm going to do it because I'm interested in writing creatively. And here I have this story handed to me, really. So that's when I
Yes,
thought,
and
well,
it's so
yeah,
and there's so much detail that you put into the story. How did you? I mean, did you commit all this to memory, or did you kind of make notes when she was
I
telling her
committed
story?
I committed it to memory because she would constantly tell me the story. And I explore her level, her kind of spirituality. Now, she did attend Catholic Church every Sunday, but she really believed in the dream state, and I talk about dreams in here, and messages from the dead, and people you can communicate with. So, you know, I think that she kept it under wraps, but I would hear it, you know, in her voice. And she had been ill not long after she came to this country, and she had to have a hysterectomy, so she couldn't have children. And she said, well, I think my great uncle said he was not into the church at all. So he said, well, if you let my wife survive, we'll light candles for you. He was talking to the Blessed Mother, you know. So she prayed to her too. And then when she survived, every Friday she had an altar and she would light it to the Blessed Mother, to feminine energy. She was very much into feminine energy. And she did that till she died. And she was 93 when
Wow,
she died.
wow.
So
Really had a great.
she felt strongly that the Mary helped her survive. You know, not God the Father. You know, if she had her choice, she probably wouldn't have attended Mass, but she did care what people would say that she didn't go, you know. But yeah, so there was a kind of mystical element to her too, and I explore it most in the last novel, The Benevolence of New Ideas. So throughout the three novels, it's her effect on three generations of Americans. So it wasn't just my generation, it was my father's, and it was mine, and then the next two. So
That that is amazing. That is
yeah,
absolutely amazing. So, at
yeah.
what point did you decide that you're going to do the trilogy?
Well, at the end of the first book, you know, I talked to my publisher and said, you know, people love trilogies. So I thought, yeah, I mean, certainly there's more. I knew what was going on in her life, every detail. And I know how what her influence was on me and my siblings, and, you know, and her influence started when she immigrated in 1912, you know. So I knew her story and how she dealt with the 1960s and the 1970s and the change in American culture. And the Italian American community, of course, was less close knit as the century wore on, you know.
And so, are the three books sort of like in chronological order of events,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
mix them up a bit?
I have them in chronological order. And let's see. Excuse, my cat is sitting on my books. Julius. So this is The Benevolence of New Ideas.
Hold on a second. I want to put you onto full screen so you can show that book off.
Yeah, yeah. And the first two have a similar cover now. I just didn't have the copies. But this is the latest one, came out in 2021, available
Yeah.
on Amazon, of course. And yeah, and this talks about her. Let's see here. Where the heck? Oh, I'm just looking for the table and contents here. It's got to be up more. Yeah, The Next Generation, 1968. And another chapter, the other half, another chapter, Beginning Again, December 1969. And New York City also becomes a character in this because
Oh wow.
because the commuter rail was right there and we were all connected to Manhattan. My uncle lived in Manhattan on East 57th. She raised him too, my father's brother and my father. She did all that because their mother died very early, her
She
sister-in-law.
certainly did a lot of mothering.
Yeah. I mean, she really, well, because she didn't have children, um, I think that was a disappointment to her, but you'd never know it. You know, she had so many other children around, me and my three siblings. We lived in the same house. So, you know, um, The Benevolence of New Ideas, 1971. The 70s come in, and you've got all of these new ideas and things happening. And the fall of 1972, Revelations. So Manhattan does become a character in this, and we see her relationship with Marie, which is based on me, but not me really. You know, it's a work of fiction, so we have to remember that. But how she influenced me, and you know, the next
So
generation.
you're Maria, your character, or
Yeah,
your life is sort of around the character of Maria in the book.
yeah, and how that happened and how she influenced Marie's version of spirituality and how she took it to the next level, you know. So, and I'll just read chapter 6, New Year's Eve, 1969, called Emerging. And I just thought this one would be fun to read. Just a couple paragraphs here.
Okay.
Emerging. The world was on the threshold of a new decade, and Angela prepared for New Year's dinner. Snow was lightly falling, blanketing the ground, and winter was taking hold. The Vietnam War still raged, but it affected her family less since Robert was home and Frank was in college. Two brothers, two guys who were affected by the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War comes into play here, and Angela's view of that. So her view of war changes as years move on. She sensed that this would be a new decade of immense change. When she thought of her unseen friends, they confirmed her suspicions. So she always communicated with the dead and with the unseen world. She thought about the choices she had made over the years and how she had made them in partnership with her unseen friends. They were never far from her mind, and lately she felt there was less of a delineation between herself and these energies. Angela thought about the night ahead, celebrating the coming year and all that it would bring. Angela looked up at the lion statue on the mantle and smiled. You will be protecting my family, thought Angela, and I'm grateful. So symbolism comes in the third book as well, from different areas, and how she has images around the house now that are a little different. She was a wonderful decorator too, you know. And
Did you inherit some of her decorating skills?
I do. Yeah. I mean, they were kind of old fashioned, and so in the 1970s, the new world was coming in, but we had a lot of old marble fireplaces and all of that. But for her time, she decorated well, and people were pretty impressed by that, especially her customers who would come in and she would fit clothing for them. You know,
Nice.
yeah. So she did keep up with the times. She really did. Um, she involved herself in our lives, and of course, she had set ideas about that. But overall, she changed, and I think she realized maybe she could have made different choices in terms of uh, being in the convent, but maybe not because of the time it was. She couldn't just go off on her own and live in the city like women
But
can
I
do
mean, she
today.
led such a full and amazing life. Just listening to her story and the kind of person she was, I don't think the convent life would have suited her at all.
No, I don't think it would have either. Um, you know, yeah, I think she was just ready to move on. And here was this opportunity, even though you don't know this person, you know, you either dive in or you just stay there and become an unsuccessful nun, you know,
Oh
you
my
know,
goodness me.
you know. And from this is the second novel, The Ascent, a novel based on true happenings. Oh, there's my glasses. So I thought I would just read a little bit from that, just to give everybody a taste of
And
one
that's got
minute
the
each.
new cover, right? Can you just show us
Yeah.
the cover?
Well, this isn't the new one. This is the
Okay,
old
no, that's
cover.
no, that's
The other
yeah.
one is the image that you put up on the screen. It's similar to this one, same designer, but it just really,
I can tell the
yeah,
similar, yeah.
yeah. I mean, they're very, very kind of modern, you know, rather than something like what I have on here, which is one of my paintings, which I just
Oh
thought was a
wow, is that one of
fashion.
your paintings?
Yeah, that's one of my paintings. Yep.
Very
Yeah.
nice.
So, okay. So just a little conversation with Sarah, one of her customers. So we get a sense of how Angela's thinking is changing.
Interacted, yeah.
The conversation with Sarah and other clients stirred Angela's long forgotten memories and feelings. This was where she balanced her American life with her European past. From the beginning, Angela was able to walk between those two worlds. Her relationship with her Italian friends was different from her clients. She also navigated between her spiritual life and the physical world. She instinctively knew how to traverse the terrain of all three and become more adept over the years. Now she adapted to each social landscape with acuity. She was very sharp. She was starting to develop her intuition here. Principessa Giulia, the princess in Palermo, had been unable to attend her wedding to Franco. This was another disappointment to Angela. She looked to the princess as a model of what life should be, so she got her elegance from there. A loving nature combined with culture and position. So she did believe in position, you know, kind of monarchist in a way, but different in Italy. It wasn't like the British monarchy. They were losing their power then, the prince and princess. Angela received a telegram from the Principessa apologizing for not being able to attend her wedding. To this day, Angela kept the telegram and would occasionally read it. She remembered sitting on the edge of her bed at the convent, reading the telegram that told her the princess was on important business in Rome with her husband. The princess's husband's last name was Lanza. Pietro di Trabia was his full title. Angela's maiden name was also Lanza. Lanza was a common Sicilian name, so no one ever mentioned the coincidence, not even her fellow students, not even the nuns. She had thought that she might mention the unusual circumstance to Mother Superior, but she sensed tension between the Mother Superior and the Principessa, so Angela kept silent. She noticed that when the two women passed each other, either on the grounds or in the hallways, they would nod to one another without smiling or speaking. So there's always kind of a gap there, you know. Why did the princess pay so much attention to her? So, yeah.
That is that is just amazing. So do you sort of feel now that her story is complete, other than possibly somebody picking this up and turning it into a movie?
I do. Everybody says, God, why isn't this a movie? So I tried to contact, oh, what's his name? I'm drawing a blank. The actor, he did the Italian food programming on PBS. Stanley Tucci. Stanley Tucci. So, but I don't know. I didn't get into it. You have to pay for someone's email. I'm like, you know what? If it happens, it happens. Someone's going to pick it up and see that potential and run
Do
with it.
you know an author, Sergio Troncoso?
What is the name?
Sergio Troncoso.
No, no.
He also wrote a very different immigrant story. And I'm trying to think of the name of his book now. And I also said to him, because it also just struck me as a unusual story.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him the same thing, because when you read something this unusual, you kind of feel this has to become a movie, but it's about connecting with just the right person who
That's
could
right.
make it happen,
That's right.
you know. So let's
It's
just
you.
put it out there in the universe. If you're watching this, either
Ah,
today or a time in the future, and you agree with us that this should be a movie, and you know the right person, let's make the connection.
yeah. I mean, why not? It's so it's fun. It's been fun, and I thought, well, I'm not going to write another one. But then I started to outline another book, not about Angela, but just taking it into the more metaphysical realm and New York City. Um, you know, in the late 70s. So we'll see. I'm like, I'm not writing another one, but then I don't know. I probably am.
Well, it's so fascinating, and it's not things that you have to conjure up, they real life experiences, things that
Yeah,
are factual. So, I don't think it's too hard to sort of allow your imagination to run wild just a little bit with all the stuff that you've got in your head. But I mean,
right,
I think it's amazing that you've done this because, you know, just even for your family to have this amazing record
right.
um, of your great aunt, I think is phenomenal. Uh, you know,
Well, she was just influential. I mean, she obviously integrated the princess's elegance and, you know, uh, manner of speaking and the nuns. And so, in a way, maybe the earthquake saved her from a life that might not have been so great, you know. But the strange thing is, um, she was literate before the earthquake. She didn't come from a lower background. Her brother, I have his telegrams or his letters he wrote to her when she was in the convent and he was with the priest. And my gosh, I read them and they're like he's a poet. I mean, so,
wow.
and her father, and I got her birth certificate, I found it.
Oh my
It said,
goodness, that is just so
it,
precious.
and she's on the birth certificate. It says her father was a laborer, but my brother said no, he was a merchant. He was a silk merchant. And I thought, yeah, why did they? Because my aunt told my brother she was a silk merchant. So he would be away a lot and he would do the silk trade. And that was hazardous
That
back
makes a
then.
lot more sense. You know,
Yeah,
if so possibly that's where she kind of inherited her flair for the finer
yeah,
things in life, you know, and the fact she was able to make clothes, maybe she had those
yeah.
memories
I guess she
of fine
did.
fabric.
I guess she did, you know. Yeah. Of course, I know her father was away a lot, was the silk trade. You went by land. You could go by boat too. But, and I talk about that in the third book, and I kind of kill off her father on the silk trade because there were a lot of marauders there, a lot of
Yes.
thieves on that um, trail. So, yeah, it's kind of
You can't
interesting.
imagine, you know, the Wild West back then.
Oh my God, it was totally the Wild West. And that's why the mafia came in and had such a hold, you know,
Crazy,
because they
crazy.
weren't getting anything from the police. They weren't getting protection from the police. That was non existent. So the mafia came in and did protection for a price.
Well, of course,
Yeah.
everything at the right price, you know.
Yeah, it was a brutal, brutal world. So
Um,
she was spared that by getting into that convent. She was spared it. She was protected. Yeah.
well, who
But
said life back then was boring? You know, I often think about it. People say that, you know, people were not as sophisticated as we are today back then, but I think that's wrong.
it's
I
wrong.
don't think so at all. I think people were very sophisticated and very um, you know, educated.
Yeah.
Maybe not in the way that we are educated today,
Yeah.
but
No one has had a degree.
yes, but people were certainly not lacking in any
No.
way. You know, I think people were pretty smart. I think they did a lot of they did a lot more with a lot less than what
Yes.
we.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Frugal. And you never felt lacking if you were frugal, you know,
I
always,
think people were pretty smart back then, in my opinion.
absolutely. Absolutely. And they didn't have social media and they talked to each other and they read books and, you know, uh, and,
Absolutely.
and
Oh, oh, to go back to then. Anyway,
not really.
Carmela, thank you so much for
Thank
giving me on
you.
and
And
sharing.
I want I wanted to say that Between the Cracks is an audiobook, so people can buy that on
Oh,
Audible.
wonderful, wonderful. Did you narrate it yourself or did you hire someone to
Yeah.
do it?
I hired a narrator. She's wonderful. Yeah. So if people prefer audiobooks, they can just get on Audible
Well,
and
that's
listen to it.
fantastic. Well, you know, all three of the books are in the carousel over
Mm-hmm.
on Amazon Live. So please do go and have a look. They are available there. They were featured in the live stream. Um, and all three books are they people I think when I had a look on Amazon you can actually buy them together bundled, isn't it?
Yes, yes. I think my
Yeah, which
publisher
I
did
thought,
that. Yep.
yes, which I thought was absolutely amazing that you can actually just buy them in um, in one bundle. So do go and
Yeah.
check that out over on Amazon. Thank you so much for sharing the
Thank
story, and I'm
you.
going to cross my fingers and my toes and everything else and hope that at some point it's going to get picked up by a filmmaker,
Well,
and
thank
I
you for
will.
having me, Bridgetti.
It's a big, big pleasure. Thank you for being a guest on the show.
Thank you.
And I want to just say a huge, big thank you to our audience who's
Oh,
watched us
yes.
over
Thank you.
on Amazon Live, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, and also
Wow.
Twitter. So thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This was amazing. And we will see you back on the next episode of Books with Brigetti. So for now, take care, stay safe, and until next time, enjoy your reading.